You know how sometimes you stumble upon a place, a seemingly ordinary stretch of land or water, and it just holds layers upon layers of forgotten stories?
Oh, absolutely. Hidden histories everywhere.
That's exactly what we found with Bayou Bartholomew in Arkansas and Louisiana. And, if you're looking for knowledge that sticks, something that really enriches your understanding without feeling overwhelming, well, that's our mission today as we explore this fascinating waterway.
And what's really special about this exploration is the unique lens we have. We're using the work of Clifton L. Birch.
Right.
We're diving deep into excerpts from his book, Bayou Bartholomew, A Regional Stream. It's quite a treasure, actually.
It really is. Found in the Ovid T. Switzer Jr. collection and generously shared with us by Ashley County Now, or ECN. They've also published some great essays on it.
And it's important to acknowledge the people behind this. Clifton Birch, he passed away back in 1999, but he dedicated himself to capturing a particular time, a particular viewpoint along the bayou.
A specific slice of life.
Yeah.
And we owe a huge debt to Ovid T. Switzer Jr.
hmm
He's actually still with us in his mid-80s for preserving this work, recognizing how significant it was.
Definitely. So our aim in this deep dive really is to unearth those captivating historical details, the deeply personal narratives, and just the unique aspects of life connected to Bayou Bartholomew as Birch documented them.
Yeah, get ready for some real aha moments, I think.
So where should we start? Maybe with something quite remarkable that Birch's research brought to light.
Oh, for it.
These specific tombstones, they were found in early 20th century black cemeteries across Arkansas and, nearby states.
Okay, paint a picture. What do they look like?
Imagine this. A rounded top sloping down towards the inscription. And they had this consistent emblem, winding vines and leaves, a circle with a sort of sinuous design inside, a little circle at the bottom, and then these crossed slender things forming an X with the letters M, T, and A tucked into the spaces. Really distinct.
MTA. Okay, so let's unpack that. Birch's sources, people like Marvin D. Jeter and Charlotte M. Copeland, started documenting these in southeast Arkansas.
Right, and they noticed a pattern.
Exactly. The death dates, mostly between, the mid-1890s and the late 1920s.
Yeah, that time frame. And their first guess, which makes a lot of sense historically, was that the Depression probably wiped out whatever organization this was.
But here's the really interesting part often. The local black communities, the
Mhm.
people right there at the cemeteries, they didn't actually know what MTA stood for.
Wow. So the meaning was lost, even locally.
Yeah, like a silent language etched in stone, its meaning just faded.
So how do you figure that out? A forgotten piece of history like that?
Well, in this case, a historian, Dr. Sam Dickinson, he suggested the Mosaic Templars of America.
Ah, the MTA.
Bingo. And apparently that name clicked, partly because there'd been an article in the Arkansas Gazette about preserving their old headquarters in Little Rock.
Okay, so a possible connection.
And here's the clincher. The architectural details on that original MTA building, they had the exact same emblem as the tombstones.
No kidding. That's the confirmation right there. That visual match.
Talk about a historical detective story, right?
Mhm.
Putting those pieces together.
Absolutely. So the Mosaic Templars of America, what exactly were they doing in these communities?
Well, Birch's sources explain they were basically a self-reliance organization. Started in Little Rock way back in 1883.
Self-reliance, meaning?
Meaning providing financial security, things like burial insurance, death benefits, stuff like that, for black citizens who were, largely excluded from mainstream banks and insurance companies at the time.
Right, that makes sense. A kind of mutual aid society providing essential services that were otherwise denied.
Exactly, and they clearly met a need. By the 1920s, the MTA had grown to something like 100,000 members.
Wow, 100,000, that's huge.
Yeah, across 26 states, even internationally. But then, like so many organizations, the Great Depression hit hard.
Ah, the economic devastation.
It led to their decline, and eventually they dissolved. So these tombstones, they're really these poignant, silent reminders of this incredible but often overlooked history of black community building and mutual support.
Resilience in the face of systemic barriers. Finding ways to care for their own.
Powerful stuff. Okay, so shifting from those silent markers to the physical landscape, Birch's work also explores the churches and cemeteries that were all along the bayou.
Yeah, Marvin Jeter's research, which apparently came from just talking to local folks, gives a really vivid picture of community life tied to the bayou.
And it's striking how specific it gets, right? Names, places.
Totally. Like Morning Star Church. It was west of Winchester on Highway 138 right at the Bayou Bridge.
And on land owned by Pillar and Company, that huge farming operation.
That's the one. 38,000 acres. Birch notes the church building itself is gone now, but you can still see the cemetery from the highway, just a dirt road between it and the bayou.
And he even names the pastor I.G. Gwynn. It makes it feel so much more real.
It does. Then there was Old Bailey Chapel. That was on Tiller and Company's Hayes Bend land.
And the layout was interesting, wasn't it? Church on one side of something called Austin Brake, cemetery on the other.
Yeah, you had to cross a dike to get between them. Pastor Given Williams was there. And Birch mentions a new Bailey Church in Reed, Arkansas now.
So communities move, evolve, but keep those connections.
Exactly. And there was Blackwood Chapel right on the bank of Coon Bayou, also on Tiller land, Causey Place, though the pastor's name for that one seems to be lost.
Some details just vanish, I guess.
Seems so. But maybe the most evocative description is Birch's own memory of that old wooden church south of Tiller.
The one he passed all the time as a student.
Yeah, he remembered it looking almost like patchwork, like additions had been tacked on over the years as the congregation grew. Less than 2 miles from the bayou, cemetery just across Crooked Bayou.
Clearly, these weren't just buildings. They were like the heart of these bayou communities, social, spiritual centers.
Absolutely. And Birch doesn't just stick to historical facts and places. His work is packed with personal stories that really bring the lived experience along the bayou to life.
Like Marvin McCoy's story about the 1991 flood near Bonita.
Yeah.
That one really stands out.
What part stuck with you?
Just the sheer power of it,
Wow.
People stuck on rooftops. And that detail about having to bring feed to barn alligators by boat. We have to come back to the alligator farming.
Oh, we will. It definitely underscores the unusual circumstances.
And then that heartbreaking story about the Stokely boy drowning during a 4th of July picnic near Cora Bluff. The whole community searching.
Shared moments of crisis, but also that communal support. It brings the human element right to the front.
Totally. And even though there was apparently a recorder issue with Stephen McCoy's story about playing near the bayou as a kid.
All right, a bit of a snafu there.
Its inclusion still kind of emphasizes how those everyday interactions with nature shape people's lives and memories.
True. And then you have the more, let's say, clandestine activities, like the moonshining.
Oh, yeah. The hidden stills. The sugar runs down to Wilmot. It sounds like everyone sort of knew it was happening, but finding the operations was tough for the authorities.
A different time, different relationship with the law, maybe, different kind of resourcefulness.
Definitely. And talk about contrast, Stephen McCoy's mother, moving from suburban Baton Rouge.
Right, to a house right on the bayou's edge with no electricity, no running water, raising 7 kids there.
Imagine. And the detail about bathing in the bayou in the summer and one of the kids nearly drowning. It shows that closeness to nature, but also the real dangers.
A world away from how most of us live now. And then the charming kids stuff like Stephen McCoy and his friend Doe building rafts.
Playing Huckleberry Finn, does Iron Raft sinking like a stone.
While Stephen's simple one made of 5-gallon drums just floated perfectly. A great little story about ingenuity and how things don't always go as planned.
But, okay, back to the alligators. Marvin McCoy's alligator farming venture near Jones, Louisiana. That was unexpected.
Wasn't it just? Remodeling a dairy barn with heated concrete floors, 80-90 degrees, so they wouldn't hibernate.
And feeding them that special high-protein commercial feed, plus ground beaver during trapping season. The logistics.
He got a state permit, ordered 400 little 6-inch gators at $30 each. The scale of it is pretty amazing.
What really gets me are the specifics Birch includes, like the feed being 70–80% protein.
And the rule about having to return 17% of them to the wild, part of the permit deal.
And selling them by length. And the fact he sold the first batch during the 1991 flood.
Incredible timing. The business didn't last, apparently ended in '93 because of buyer access and price drops. But still, the image of collecting eggs by helicopter and incubating them upright.
Right. And then Birch notes that the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission claimed in '98 there were no alligator farms near Bayou Barthlomew.
Makes you wonder, doesn't it? About regulations, reporting. What slips through the cracks?
Even the quick mention of a valuable hunting dog near the bayou just reminds you how important animals were to life and livelihood there.
True. Birch also gets into some pretty significant demographic shifts in the region. particularly the increasing Latino population in the U.S. He draws on articles from the LA Times and the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette for this.
Yeah, this section gives some important historical backdrop, looking at those earlier waves of immigration, late 19th, 20th century. Labor for farms, railroads, mines.
And the growth of cities like Chicago in the 20s drawing people in.
But it wasn't always a smooth process, was it? Bush's sources mention these periods of public outcry.
Exactly. And mass repatriations like Operation Wetback in the 50s and those sweeps back in the 1930s. Horrible stuff that affected even legal residents.
You see that stark decline in the Mexican-born population between 1930 and 1940 really shows the human cost.
And then the Bracero program during World War II shows how labor needs can completely shift immigration policy, at least temporarily.
But then, post-1970s, there's this huge surge in immigration from Mexico,
Yeah.
partly driven by former Braceros who'd made connections here.
The numbers Birch cites are pretty dramatic. Less than 600,000 Mexican-born residents in the U.S. in 1960.
To over 7 million by the late 1990s,
Yeah.
making them the largest immigrant group.
And many who came after the 60s were initially undocumented, but later gained legal status through amnesty or family connections. It really was the largest sustained mass migration to the U.S., bigger than the earlier European waves.
And this shift changed things, didn't it? Both obviously and subtly.
Oh, yeah. More Spanish signs, Latino music, food, salsa outselling ketchup. Birch includes that detail.
And the census projections back then.
Yeah.
Latinos expected to become the largest minority group, maybe a quarter of the population by mid-century, which has pretty much happened, especially in places like California.
There's even a quote Birch pulls from an article about wanting to maintain Mexicanness while also becoming American. That captures the complexity of it, I think.
But Birch also includes a counterpoint, right?
Right.
From Dan Morris with Americans for an Immigration Moratorium.
Yes. Raising concerns about impacts on schools, taxes, healthcare, property values. It's important to show those different perspectives that were part of the conversation back then.
Absolutely. Got to present the whole picture from the sources.
And Birch kind of rounds off this section noting a growing feeling of acceptance and the idea of Latinos becoming, quote, the backbone of the agricultural industry.
Which reflects both the changing demographics and the reality of labor in certain sectors.
Now, aside from these big societal shifts, Birch is just a master at weaving in these wonderful little anecdotes and bits of local color. They really make the place come alive.
Oh, definitely. Like the story of Bull Juice, leading to a super fast engagement.
What was it about that one that you liked?
Just the speed. The girl's father practically offering his wagon for the wedding trip before the guy even finished proposing.
It feels
Yes.
so direct, maybe.
Pragmatic.
Yeah, a certain eagerness there, perhaps. And the turkey war near the levee.
Hilarious. Wild gobblers getting territorial because Farmer Brown's domesticated turkeys were mingling with their hens? A turkey turf war.
It's wonderfully absurd. And then Birch throws in that little aside about maybe finding a recipe for spoonbill catfish caviar in the book. A little wink from the author.
That's personality. But some stories are more poignant, like Mr. Ellie Rawls talking about outliving his doctor's predictions and his very specific ideas about where he wanted to be buried.
Those personal touches give you a real sense of the individuals, and the observation about justice in the Delta, how it seemed to depend on your social standing, with different punishments for different folks.
Yeah, that's a pretty sharp commentary on the inequality at the time.
Even that small saying from the Depression, comparing the older generation's coal, oil, and snuff day on Saturdays with the younger folks' wine and party time, it says so much about changing norms.
It really does. Okay, so then Birch also tackles some growing environmental concerns, specifically the dangers from animal waste. He cites an AP article from '97.
Yeah, this shows an increasing awareness back then of the ecological impact of large-scale farming.
The numbers are kind of staggering.
Yeah.
Animal manure production in the U.S. being, 130 times greater than human waste? Like 5 tons per person per year?
And a lack of national standards leading to water pollution. That's the core issue highlighted.
The comparison he includes. A big hog farm in Utah, potentially producing more waste than the entire city of Los Angeles. That puts it in perspective.
And a Senate study pointing to agriculture as the biggest polluter of impaired rivers and streams, 60%, plus the data on fish kills from manure spills in Iowa, Minnesota, Missouri.
Right, over 40 spills killing hundreds of thousands of fish in just 1 year, way up from a few years earlier.
So you see Senator Tom Harkin proposing national standards and the farm groups reacting cautiously. It's that classic tension between regulation and industry that was clearly ramping up.
Definitely a hot topic then. Now, one of the absolute best parts of Birch's work, I think, is these transcribed conversations he had with people who lived along the bayou.
Oh, absolutely. The interview with Lucy Bradshaw, 86 years old, in 1998, and still fishing. That's a direct link to the past right there.
And the image of Birch having to wait for Mr. Bradshaw to get back from his morning fishing before they could even talk, it just shows how tied his life still was to the bayou.
And finding his place in Yorktown, asking around at the feed store in Star City. It feels so authentic, so grounded.
Bradshaw's stories are amazing, like remembering a flood where they used telephone wires along the road to pull a boat through Yorktown.
Wow, resourcefulness again. And being baptized right in Bayou Bartholomew back in 1925 with about 30 other people, that gives you a real sense of the Bayou's role in their spiritual lives.
And his family history, 7 kids, and he was the only one left by 98. That really speaks to the passage of time, his description of netting fish.
Using 2 signs, muddying the water with hose, sometimes getting a whole wagon load of buffalo fish.
Followed by big community fish fries. That sounds like pure tradition. Even the small detail about having to chop cotton on the 4th of July in 25 instead of fishing says a lot about their lives.
And the story about picking damp cotton with Marvin Smith and deciding on a whim to borrow some whiskey instead.
Classic. Bottling it up, hiding pints in the grass along the gravel road to sell. The good old days, as he called them.
It paints such a picture. And his observation about the springs drying up after the bayou went dry later on and how that affected the fishing, he witnessed those environmental changes firsthand.
He really did. His stories about netting suckers in Turtle Creek, catching so many they could barely lift the net.
And knowing exactly how to prepare them, slice them thin, fry them crisp till the bones disappear. That's deep practical knowledge.
And people from Piney Hill netting wagon loads from a ditch with just a simple hoop net. The abundance back then seems incredible.
Even his crappie fishing story on the White River, finding that big net, catching huge crappie, but only taking what they needed. Maybe a different ethic back then, more about sustenance.
Perhaps. And Birch slipping in that story about bootleggers aging whiskey barrels in the rough water of the White River just adds another layer of local lore.
Birch also briefly touches on railroad history, like the failed Halley to Eunice railroad bed becoming a county road, part of Highway 208.
Shows how infrastructure gets repurposed. And the ambition of that original 1852 plan to connect the Mississippi all the way to the Red River via Camden. Big dreams for the region.
Big dreams indeed. Then we get another fantastic transcribed interview, this time with Arthur McGriff and some others, hanging out at Bill Edmonds' feed store in Star City.
The setting alone, a feed store. You can almost smell it. Perfect place for swapping stories.
And Birch got there through a lead from Betty Carter at the Highway Department, telling him to talk to Calvin McGriff. He was clearly doing his homework, even photographing all the bridges over the bayou.
Arthur McGriff's fishing story. A fish breaking his pole, other guys having the same trouble in this one deep hole.
And then finding all those lost hooks snagged in a willow tree hanging over the water. Every fisherman can relate to that frustration.
Totally. And Bill Edmonds asking about those 4-inch holes in old cypress logs. Turns out they were for oak pegs used in rafting them down the river, a forgotten logging technique.
McGriff talking about seining with a log chain on the bottom of the net to weigh it down, catching a 50-pound buffalo from a wooden boat that could flip easily.
And initially having to swim out to set their trot lines. Tough work and risky.
Then the story of using 300 pounds of green walnuts in tow sacks to stun the fish in the holes, catching more than ever before.
Wow. Probably not something you'd do today, environmentally speaking, but effective, I guess.
And John Hendley pipes up, saying they use lime sometimes, but McGriff just says didn't have money for lime. Tells you a lot about their means.
Hendley also remembered Jack Carter cooking fish in a big wash pot over at Abel's Creek. Huge fish fries, with people coming all the way from Dumas. Food bringing community together again.
McGriff recalls those suckerfish runs up the bayou, learning that same trick of slicing them thin and frying them till the bones vanished. He even mentions going to a sucker supper up in Missouri. Traditions travel.
And he logged cypress himself as a teenager, 15 years old, using a crosscut saw, a direct link to that whole industry.
Birch adds his own little comment here about, arsenic and DDT probably being in the fish back then too. A sobering thought.
Yeah, brings you back to reality.
Yeah.
Then there are the quick anecdotes. A train falling through the Bayou Bridge near Krigler.
And trains having to stop for cows because of Arkansas's free-range law. The image of the train crew trying to catch up with the cows. Classic local humor.
Love it. Okay, next up is the conversation with Junior Brooks. 73 years living near the bayou, west of Montrose. Another long-term perspective.
His story about that meeting where international paper basically said, don't touch the bayou, the water's perfect for our paper, is pretty revealing about industrial interests.
Definitely. And his memories of riding the train, the old caboose, stopping at tiny places like Wallace Crossing, Dombey, it evokes a whole different era of travel.
He fished the bayou his whole life, too, used all sorts of methods, and he also noticed the decline, specifically in flathead catfish, another witness to change.
He confirms the widespread moonshining and the baptisms happening all along the bayou, wherever a road met the water. It was central to life, illicit and sacred.
But his observation about the population decline is stark. Just him and one neighbor left in a 6-mile stretch where there used to be many families. That really hits home the hollowing out of rural areas.
His stories of hunting and trapping with his brother-in-law, literally living off what they taught sometimes, using cotton nets that rotted fast.
Ooh.
Is that self-sufficiency again?
And his family sharecropping during the Depression, his father dying young, remembering picking 3 bales of cotton in '35. Real hardship.
Even the memory of getting typhoid shots during the '27 flood lined us up just like cattle, a blunt picture of public health measures back then.
And he remembers that old one-way steel bridge over the bayou, the kind with runarounds so cars could pass, infrastructure from another time.
Now, Birch describes this big concrete foundation in the bayou. Turns out it was for a railroad turntable.
Yeah, a really clever piece of engineering. It let a section of the railroad track swing sideways, parallel to the bayou, so steamboats could get past.
Adapting to the environment, to the needs of transport. Amazing.
The old bridge ruins are still there, apparently, though the gears for the turntable are likely long gone. Mr. Brooks remembered people salvaging stuff from the water during the '27 flood near there.
And he connects the railroad tracks being pulled up in the late '30s to the timber being cleared out. Cause and effect. The landscape changing as the economy shifted.
Birch's search for information itself becomes part of the story sometimes, like visiting the Morehouse Parish Police Jury Office, talking to E.A. Greer.
And specifically trying to find an older black man who lived his whole life on the bayou near Bastrop. Birch really wanted those voices.
He gets a lead, Amos Mason, on Old Berlin Road, also known as William Chapel Bridge Road, lived there since '57.
And that great line from the guy Birch asks for directions. Who can write a book? Just perfect. Shows the community noticing, wondering.
So the conversation with Amos Mason, another gem. He lived right near the bayou in Louisiana.
Turned down for WWI eye service, Birch notes. Lived a long life right there instead.
Didn't know how to make persimmon beer, though, interestingly enough, despite it being a local thing.
Shows how traditions aren't always universal, even locally. But he remembered his father trot-lining behind their house, using a bell on the line to signal a catch.
What a great detail. Decades of sharecropping, plowing with mules, turning them loose at noon, making muscadine wine. A life tied to the land.
Hunting rabbits with dogs, twisting them out of hollow logs or smoking them out sounds intense.
And his pride in his grandson playing basketball? Just a normal, relatable moment.
I liked his comment about picking up hitchhikers back in the day, didn't matter who they were. And that specific story about the black man near Memphis who bought him dinner and gave him cash for the ride.
Yeah, a different time, maybe a different kind of trust on the road. He also drove a school bus for years, taking kids to the zoo in Little Rock, never had an accident. A point of pride.
And the farewell. Birch thanking him and Mr. Mason saying, "You are welcome, but I will say you about done talked me out." It just feels so real.
Totally genuine. Now, Birch also includes this feature article by Mary Farmer about a lost town called Doylestown.
Right. Not directly on the bayou, but very close, less than 2 miles from the start of it. So part of the same historical neighborhood, basically.
Okay, exactly. Farmer's article traces its history using old Pine Bluff newspapers. It sprang up as a lumber camp when the Pine Bluff and Sheridan Railroad was being built. The limb-dodging line, they called it.
Around 400 workers and families living in tents, a whole temporary town based around logging.
They used temporary tracks, spurs to get the logs out, oxen, mules, and this huge 2-story steam skidder with a massive cable. Farmer notes you can still see the trails left by that skidder today.
Wow, a physical trace left on the landscape. The railroad eventually made it to Sheridan, then Benton, and Doylestown became an official stop.
They built a proper depot with segregated waiting rooms, of course, it being 1904 and a section house, but apparently it wasn't much to look at.
Yeah, the anecdote about people getting off the train, being disappointed, some just sleeping in the depot or getting right back on the next train, it suggests it never quite boomed.
Some guys named Sawyer and Austin tried to make it official, platting the old camp into town lots in 1912, got a post office in 1914.
And Mary Farmer had a personal connection, didn't she? Her grandfather moved there, her dad was born there. Adds that personal weight to the story of a lost place.
It does. And Birch uses this section to list all the different kinds of mills you'd find in these bayou towns back then. It's quite a list.
Yeah, blacksmith shops, sawmills, groundhog sawmills. He calls them shingle mills using cypress, coop mills using elm for barrels.
Stave mills for oak barrel staves, gum mills for furniture wood, handle mills using hickory, plus cotton gins, grist mills grinding corn for meal and feed.
And the byproducts like the chops from the grist mill being used for making whiskey and then feeding the leftover stillage to the hogs. Everything connected.
A whole local ecosystem of industries based on natural resources.
Then Birch brings us back to more modern threats. Zebra mussels showing up in Bayou Bartholomew in 1998. A new kind of problem.
Yeah, first time found in Arkansas, apparently. Came over from Europe in ship ballast water, spread like wildfire through the Great Lakes and other rivers.
They attach to everything hard, cost millions to control. The worry was their impact on native mussels, turtles, fish, a real ecological threat.
He also briefly touches on the chronic flooding issues around McGehee, Dumas, Gould, and this big regional irrigation project that had been talked about for 20 years to try and manage the water better.
Water too much or too little, always a central theme, isn't it?
Seems so. Now, maybe one of the most unique sections in Birch's work is that long list he compiled, remembering an earlier time along Bayou Bartholomew.
Oh yeah, when is the last time you went
Yeah.
west? It's incredible, like stepping into a time machine.
It really is. Just reading through it evokes so much. Climbing over stiles, hearing a rooster crow, using a straight razor.
Rendering lard, splitting shingles with a fro, eating crackling bread, seeing pigs with those old rounded hooves.
The smell of a hickory smokehouse, using a scythe, shocking hay by hand, threshing machines, winnowing grain, 8 mule teams plowing.
Bloomers, teams of oxen, warming closets on wood stoves, rolling Prince Albert's cigarettes, hearing church bells toll when someone died.
Watching a sow build a nest, hearing screech owls, wash pots bubbling in the yard, using bluing for laundry, pitcher pumps, hand crane planters.
Finding bee trees, eating hoghead souse, gas irons, flat irons heated on the stove, Aladdin lamps, carding cotton, making lye soap, making hominy.
Hunting for breakfast, gathering eggs, homemade yeast rolls, all-night barbecues, catching rainwater, twisting the cores out of boils ouch, quinine, making your ears ring.
Walking miles home from your girlfriend's house, hissing ganders chasing you, sugar sack underwear, feed sacks with flower patterns used for clothes.
Cowbells on trot lines, that cannonball contraption with scrap iron and lawnmowers, overheard sayings, wedding late, baby on time, much obliged, swayback horses, a cake falling, dog cornbread.
Skinny dipping, hoe cakes, persimmons, looking for night crawlers, sleeping in church, corncob fights, stealing watermelons.
Chopping cotton, picking cotton, baling cotton, stripping sorghum or sugarcane, making home brew, smoking rabbits out of trees, eating possum grapes, carrying cracklings in your pocket, breaking horses and mules, milking kicking cows, flat breaking fields, running middles, planting lespedeza, carrying down rows, cutting bee trees, trying to catch swarms, putting bees in hives, picking peanuts.
Ironing clothes, reading by lamplight. It just goes on and on. It's such a rich, dense picture of a way of life that's largely gone.
It truly is. Birch even includes a funny little anecdote about his own note-taking method.
Right, folding typing paper in his pocket, and then accidentally washing a shirt full of notes.
Ruining a whole load of laundry with soggy, clinging bits of paper. A very relatable hazard for anyone who takes notes.
And that childhood story.
Right.
Getting spanked with a buggy whip socket for shooting prize chickens and then having to eat the rooster. You wouldn't forget that lesson.
Definitely not. He also mentions seeing modern chicken and hog operations near the bayou later on, but sort of pointedly saying he didn't want to know about the waste disposal. Brings us back to those environmental concerns.
Yeah, conscious choice not to look too closely, maybe. Now, Birch also addresses a very serious and somber topic. The 2 WWII Japanese relocation centers that were right there in southeast Arkansas near the bayou.
Jerome in Drew County and Rower in Dusha County. He notes the local, kind of blunt names they were often called, Jerome Jap Camp, Rower Jap Camp.
He provides the context, right? Executive Order 9066, the post-Pearl Harbor hysteria and prejudice, the fear about the West Coast being vulnerable.
And specifically mentions the big oil storage tanks near the coast as a major security concern back then, the potential for signaling enemy subs.
He makes the point that if those Japanese-American communities had lived elsewhere in less strategically sensitive areas, maybe the forced relocation wouldn't have happened.
It's a crucial point. And Birch states very clearly his intention to speak up about this, calling it one of the darkest hours in American history. It shows his willingness to tackle difficult subjects.
Absolutely. He also includes a quick note about his research process, sometimes needing multiple trips to learn about a place.
And that intriguing little story about a stranger warning him not to go ask for information at a certain house, and Birch deciding to heed the warning, shows you gotta trust local instincts sometimes.
You do. Then there's the funny story about Farmer Brown, the Baptist deacon.
Selling the milk cow to the
Yeah.
Methodist steward purely on their word of honor as church officials.
And then the buyer doesn't come back to pay, and Farmer Brown is confused about what exactly a steward's duties are if they don't include paying your debts.
Yeah.
Classic Delta humor, playing on those community roles and expectations.
And Lloyd Evans' retirement plans, those were something else.
Weren't they? Getting all his teeth pulled so he could fit more chewing tobacco in his mouth?
And his plan to just check in at home 3 times a day for meals? A very structured retirement.
Hilarious.
Yeah.
Okay, persimmon beer. Birch brings this up as a common thing in the Bayou area. Trees everywhere. Fruit used for this homemade drink.
And the different pronunciations, pussimon, simon. He apparently asked everyone how to make it.
But kept getting the same answer. Yeah, heard of it, but don't know the recipe. Until he finally found it close to home from Lawrence and Betty Green.
And Betty Green's recipe is surprisingly simple, isn't it? Gather ripe persimmons better after a frost, put them in a big crock like a churn.
Add lots of water, a little sugar, cover it up, let it work. Longer equals stronger. Maybe add malt for more kick.
Taste it to see when it's ready, then dip it out and strain it through a cloth. But crucially, no instructions for sealing it in bottles.
Right. He warns about bottles exploding if you cap it too soon. Important safety tip for aspiring persimmon brewers.
And it includes that great little poem, Possum Time, all about hunting possum in the fall with Rastus the dog, using a torch, chopping the tree.
Roasting the possum with potatoes and washing it all down with that homemade cinnamon beer captures the whole scene perfectly.
Now, the section on Selma and Tiller gets pretty heavy. It mixes local history with a real tragedy.
Selma was the older town on that old military road. Mrs. Watson confirmed its location for Birch. He includes details about the Selma Methodist Church.
Land deeded in 1880, first building destroyed by snow. Baptists finished it, sold it back to the Methodists in 85. Little stories of community effort.
And John Hawley finding that new steeple built right around the old woodpecker-eaten one, and seeing those massive hand-hewn cypress timbers inside, supposedly from Poff Break, sawn at a watermill. Tangible history.
But then the story turns dark. The unsolved murders in 1904 near Selma. William Stevenson, his pregnant wife Jenny, and Ella Barrett all killed. Their house burned down.
The suspected motive was robbery, right? Stevenson had just sold his cotton in Tiller, and there was a dance happening in Selma that night.
The timing is chilling. And Birch notes how the theories and whispers about who did it persisted among old-timers for decades. Never proven.
He gives some background on Stevenson, living through the Civil War in a dangerous river town. And the general feeling was local thieves were responsible. But maybe also suspicion fell on a poor new family in the area. No proof, just suspicion.
But then Birch reveals his own deeply personal connection. He was courting Ella Barrett.
Unbelievable. His deceased brother's family was related to her. He was looking forward to their wedding anniversary party that night.
And he reluctantly agreed to take Alberta Stevenson to the dance in Selma, leaving Ella at the Stevenson house because she wasn't feeling well. He promised to be back soon.
Imagine the guilt he must have carried. He describes the scene when he left Mr. Stevenson by the fire, Mrs. Stevenson sewing, Ella still in her coat. It's heartbreaking.
Mrs. Watson's memories add another layer. Her parents being terrified after the murders, her dad keeping a shotgun by the bed, suspecting foreigners working in the timber camps. The fear was palpable.
Her grandfather's creepy encounter with those men following their buggy near the burned house, and the boys who discovered the fire. Just awful details.
There are even contradictions in the accounts, like about Mrs. Barrett's horrific injuries. Trauma and time can muddle memories. He mentions Vivian Barrett Peacock, who wrote about her father's side of things, and the tombstone in Selma Cemetery marking the Stevensons' grave. A tragic, unresolved story.
Really heavy stuff. Birch then brings us right up to 1998 again with, and the bayou went dry. His observations during that early summer drought.
Irrigation pumps running nonstop everywhere. That constant hum must have been the soundtrack of that summer.
He focuses on this one young farmer, struggling to get water onto his 260 acres because the bayou was so low, partly due to all the pumping upstream between Pine Bluff and the Washita River.
The farmer's desperate efforts trying to extend the pump's suction pipe, even using a boat, encountering an alligator in the process, you feel his frustration.
And the bayou getting stagnant, even flowing backward at one point. That's how low it was.
Birch sees a huge storm west of Highway 65, but it stays sunny where the farmer is. The randomness of weather.
Then the realization. The runoff from that storm, way upstream near Yorktown and Star City, took 36 hours to travel the 90 miles down to where the farmer needed it, near Tiller.
So the farmer, after seeing the bayou dry Thursday night, probably woke up Friday morning to find water, thinking someone upstream had released it, but it was just that delayed runoff finally arriving.
A small reprieve, maybe? But Birch ends by noting this was only the first week of July. The driest months were still ahead, an ominous feeling.
And he includes a photo reference from May 98 showing rubbish dumped in the bayou, exposed by the low water, even though the landfill was only 3 miles away. Pollution, another recurring theme.
Finally, Birch includes that long list of acknowledgments. So many people helped him gather these stories.
It really underscores that this kind of deep local history is often a collaborative effort, relying on community memory and generosity.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Clifton L. Birch's Bayou Bartholomew, it's just incredibly clear how much more there is than just a regional history here.
Oh, absolutely. It's this vibrant tapestry, isn't it? Woven with forgotten groups like the MTA, individual lives their struggles, their joys, the huge changes in communities, and that constant complex relationship with the bayou itself.
Exactly. This whole exploration, thanks to Birch and Ovid Switzer and ACN, has given us such a unique window into a specific time and place. You hear the authentic voices.
It's a powerful reminder that every place, no matter how seemingly ordinary, holds these compelling stories just waiting to be uncovered or rediscovered.
So, thinking back over everything we touched on, what aspects of this journey along Bayou Bartholomew really stick with you? What questions linger?
For me, it's really about how those echoes of the past, the environmental changes, the economic shifts, the community bonds, even the tragedies, how they continue to shape the present, not just there, but everywhere.
That's a great point. It highlights how vital it is to preserve these local histories, these personal narratives. There are always more stories unfolding, even in places we think we know well.
Maybe it's an invitation, for all of us to look a little closer at the hidden histories right in our own backyards.